My dad actually grew up in a really abusive household, every form of abuse you can imagine. And my dad, he was a good dad, but he was really angry. He didn't really know how to take care of all of the things that he had seen growing up. And so he was constantly angry. I didn't really understand why. And he escaped with alcohol. So he's constantly drinking. My mom, unfortunately, suffers from a severe mental disorder, kind of like borderline schizophrenia. So for me, kids are great receivers, but they don't know how to interpret all of that. And so I just did the best I could and took care of my two sisters. We lived in the outskirts of town in a trailer. But when I was about 11 years old, I was invited by a neighbor to go to church, and they had a bus ministry, which was huge because I wouldn't have been able to go to church. And so I went, and I remember just feeling this calm and this peace. And the teacher said, if we prayed, we could ask Jesus into our hearts. And I just remember thinking, like, I get to take this with me back home. And alone was something I knew really well. And I wanted what this teacher was selling. So I raised my hand and I just prayed and I asked Jesus into my heart. And it was like he became my imaginary best friend. Like, he came with me everywhere I went. I continued to go to that church because they did have a bus ministry. And I didn't really feel like I fit in, but I did find a best friend. And she went to a Christian school. I went to a public school, and it didn't really feel like I fit in anywhere, but I had my imaginary best friend, and I now had this new best friend. And so she went to a Christian college in Florida, actually. And so my parents at this time were not believers. Like, they did not want me to go, but I had to pay for it myself, and my best friend was going, and so they let me go. And that is where I met my husband. So I met him my freshman year. So it's crazy because I met him in the same town that we just moved to 20 years later. So kind of cool. But I met him, and he seemed like a fairy tale. He came from the Christian family. He had all the things. And I really didn't know what a marriage really looked like because my parents were just kind of surviving. But I knew after graduating, I did not want to go back home. And so we got married right after college. I think I was 20. And I just knew that he cared for me, and this felt safe and secure. And so we got married, and I started teaching in the fall, a kindergarten through 12th grade, small church school about an hour away from my house. So I ended up carpooling with a family that was in our small church. And just from the get-go, we started having some severe, serious issues in our marriage. Without going in all the details, I ended up confiding in this young man that was in high school, 7 years younger than me, in the car, and an emotional affair happened. Over time, I was a virgin when I got married, and I never did any of the bad things because I was hoping that my faith could save my parents. So I was a good kid, but in those really tough seasons of marriage, it was hard, and there was a lot of stuff going on with my husband and things in our small church. But so I ended up confiding in this young man, and he wanted more in the relationship, and it inevitably turned into an affair. And I guess I didn't really realize all the ramification legally, but I knew I was in a really hard position as far as I wanted to get out of this toxic thing. I knew I was sinning on a huge level, and I was still teaching third and fourth grade. And so I ended up going to my pastor and sharing, the problems in our marriage. And there was 2 deacons in the room, and I ended up confiding, and he's like, we've already looked into it. 15 is the age of consent in the state of Nebraska. We're fine. And it got leaked out through my entire church by these pastors. They breached confidentiality, and then come to find out he was just shy of the age of consent. So that turned, and at that time, my husband wanted a divorce, and I was trying to fight for our marriage. I was trying to get right with God, and it just blew up. It led to me getting sentenced, which they thought it was going to get dropped because I never had gotten into trouble and came forward. But I got a heavy load of 4 to 8 years. So that looked like me going to prison. Then I had to I was now a sex offender, registered sex offender. So I'd have to go to therapy at a mental institution. So I had to go to mental institution, back to prison, and then to work release. This whole time, God just totally rebuilt me from the ground up. Like my relationship with him wasn't based on this former church and what they said since I was a child. He got to reveal himself to me on a new level. And that was really hard because a lot of those believers that felt like my family over my own family actually, like what, they ignored me and they treated me horribly. And so that was really difficult. I ended up going home on a furlough while I was at work release, and I became pregnant with our oldest daughter, Bella. And so I was just paralyzed with fear because at 2 years, I could parole home if I got good time, which I'd be the first in the state of Nebraska to get it in years. And so I was just ridden with all this fear because if I didn't get it, I was going to send my baby home. And praise God, I did. But I was going back to my marriage had been kind of on hold. I mean, Mike was amazing. He came to, visit me every visitation over 2 years of our marriage, but we really didn't have a marriage, like a normal marriage, until I got back and I was pregnant. And now I was back in the town where my name was splashed on the front page of the newspapers. I grew up and was, graduated in that small town. And so I didn't even want to go to Walmart. Now I'm a registered sex offender. I have this huge monitor, a brand new baby. And my coping mechanism at the time became exercising. I would exercise like 2 to 3 hours a day just to like survive. Like I had severe anxiety, probably much like my mom. But I remember one day I was like pedaling my bike super fast and I was pulling my daughter on a low bike trailer behind me. And it was like almost this audible voice popped on and it said, "You know what joy and peace is like. And right now you don't have any of it. Come back to me." And I just remember thinking like, it's been 2 years since I've been out. I've just been like so numb that I've been hardened. It's like Easter Sunday coming up and haven't been in church because I was so afraid to go anywhere. Like I was shopping at Walmart in the middle of the night so no one would see me. And so I did. I went to a church far away where people didn't know me. And I heard that familiar song, "Come awake, come awake, come on, rise up from the grave." And I just remember thinking like, I'm spiritually dead. Like the things that should feel real to me didn't, because I've been so allowed myself to get hard. And so that started kind of a journey of getting back to a place where I could go to church again. And I started into like a deep healing Bible study to break free from some of the sexual stuff that happened in my life and the ramifications and just all of this stuff. And so I started processing that. But I started getting some of that rejection and pushback. So the first thing that happened was my registration. I was supposed to only register for 5 years. And it changed overnight. I got this certified letter in the mail saying you're now having to register for 25 years. Like the system of being, least likely to reoffend had gone away. There was nothing else. And so I just remember feeling like I went from 5 years of having my address open and having all these restrictions from 5 years to 25 years. And it just like tanked me,
I'm gonna jump in real quick.
Sure.
Brandy, with all that going on, did you still feel connected to God?
Not the first 2 years. During prison, I did. But when I got out, the fear took over. And so I feel like all the lies that Satan had tried to speak over me, like those became just a reality. This is what society thinks of you. You're a monster. You're all that stuff. And so the more I listened to the lies, the less I heard from God. So during those 2 years, no, I did not feel a strong connection to God.
What about the church hurt? I'm curious because I hear a lot about the church hurt, right? And and we all fall short, But I hear a lot of people, they struggle with that pain. Can you give us an idea of the church hurt? Because you spend a lot of time in the church and you worshiping, you doing all this, and to them to do and treat you the way. Can you just give an idea of the pain that might have caused you?
Yeah. So yes, definitely. That's one of the biggest things I've struggled with, was even getting back to a place to go to church. So, I mean, growing up, like that was my family. Like that was my safe place. Like what they said is what I believe to be true. And so when they leaked that out and I was ostracized, my whole family didn't, my parents had to stop going to church. They were actually new believers when this all kind of came to the surface, and they weren't welcome there. And so that was deafening to me, because in my head, like I saw the church as God, because everything
Okay.
I believed, I was, as a kid, like that was it. And so when they rejected me, it felt like God rejected me. So that was
Mm,
huge. And then about this time in my story is where I did, I went to this new church. They planted a campus church in Fremont. So I ended up going there, and I flourished. My campus pastor knew about all this stuff. I started leading ladies ministry. Like all these good things happened.
yeah.
Then I was helping out in a kid's room with my own children in the room, and big church, so the big main mothership, found out, and they opened up my past with my campus pastor in front of everyone. And
Mm,
that is when I started drinking. It
okay.
was just that constant wounding that I'll never be enough. It doesn't matter
Okay.
what I do. I'll never be good enough. That is that's kind of where alcohol entered into my world, because I never really touched it. My dad struggled with it so much, so I stayed away from it. But at
Yeah.
that time, a couple of friends, drank socially, and so I
Right.
started doing it. But the more rejection I got, and especially when that church, I mean, I was on ministry. My husband was actually in a position at the church. Like they knew.
Right.
This pastor actually sent me a Bible in prison that he didn't remember. I was leading Angel Tree ministry over multiple
Mhm.
campuses for kids receiving Christmas present from their incarcerated parent. I'm like, did you not know that I was doing all this stuff? And so for me, it's like, as a church, you put on your website a safe place where people feel confident. I'm like, you
Yeah.
just, so yeah,
Right.
that is what just tanked me. And so the shadows offered something better, and I just like, I'm done. Like, what do you want? My Facebook account got deleted. The YMCA, okay, Christian Association, they redid their memberships. They kicked me out. I tried to get my daughter into a Christian school. They
Yeah.
said I couldn't even come on school grounds. And then, which is crazy, because then over here in a normal, like in the community wise, I had a friend that invited me to a MOPS group, like a mothers of preschoolers group.
Hmm.
And so I joined, not wanting to be in social, community at all. And this group I found out was going to dissolve, and they asked me to lead. And I'm like, guys, here's my story. Like, I'm a registered sex offender. Y'all don't want me
Yeah.
leading a mother of preschoolers group. I met with
Right.
this pastor, and they contacted MOPS International, and they're like, nope, we think you're the one. So here I am in a community realm
Mhm.
leading a MOPS group for 8 years. I did. And then over here, I'm getting rejected from churches and church ministries. And so that
Right.
to me was extremely confusing.
Right.
And I numbed it all with alcohol. And the stronger, the better. And I didn't, you never realize it when you start drinking that you're addicted, because you're
Yeah.
getting some sort of relief. And for me, it was just layers and layers and layers of shame and rejection that had been I hadn't dealt with.
How did you get to the other side of that? Of the other side of the guilt, the shame, the drinking. What was your journey in that part of your story?
Well, that's a very good question. So, my husband, I'm going to start here. So my husband, he's watching all this stuff. Like, I'm not drinking until my mid 30s. And, it wrecked us all as a family, because now we had to we stopped going to that church, obviously. And then COVID hit and that church ended up dissolving. But it was brutal. Like, our campus church was basically told, either you resign or you're going to get fired. And he was almost an age of retirement. Like, it just, like, it was a bad breakup. Anyway, so I knew I needed to get back to a church, but I didn't want to. I mean, it was horrible. So I'm just basically drinking and numbing myself. And so the first step, my husband wanted me to write a letter to myself, because I was trying to get healthy. Like, I was trying not to drink, but I was so far into it that I was really, really, I was hiding alcohol. I mean, at this point, I'm addicted to vodka. Like, it just went. I do things 110%, and I just was like, I was a hot mess. And the fact that I stayed at home and I homeschooled, like, it just made it, more accessible. Like, where I was slightly, if I started getting the anxiety, like, I was numbing myself with that. So I did. I wrote this letter, and I just really invited the Lord into my pain. And, like, I felt like it was the beginning of a healing process for me. But it says, Brandy, you are more than this. This will not give you what your heart truly needs. You need me to weather this storm. Don't look at what they're drinking or the bottles on the shelf. They never satisfy. Look into my eyes and draw in my spirit. I promise life, and you know that you were close to death. It may feel strong, but that was fire you poured down your throat, coating the pain for but a moment. Give me the pain, all of it. I can handle it all. That way will lead to your fall, and you know how close you are. I know this life isn't fair. This is not what I planned, sweet girl. Let it out, but only let me in. I promise to give you what you need each time you take my hand instead of that drink. Come here by my side, sit and rest. You are perfect, my daughter, perfect in my eyes. Come sit, wear your crown, your gown, and rest. My mansion is secure, safe, and you are mine. I sit on the throne as the King of kings and ruler of all. Shut them all out, for it will never matter when we spend our eternity together. I have a plan for this pain, so give it all to me. Hold nothing back, including this useless drink that will start you wanting the next one and never feel full. Give it to me, and I will give you something better. Drink me in instead, little one. Choose me, for I have chosen you. So I started.
Wow. That was
Good job,
good.
Mike. He told me to write it, and I did.
Right. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. So I revisited that, and, being sober leaves you to feel all those big feels again. And I was trying to balance drinking with a restricted regimen, but the problem was I could never control it. It always controlled me. So despite being wounded by several pastors, I did know I needed to get back to a church. And often that door of rejection was where I discover God's plan. So I knew where I couldn't go, but and same with homeschooling, like, all these doors are shut. So that was God's plan. So I say that to people that feel so rejected. It's like, God has still got a door open. You just have to find it. And I know it feels like death because all this is negative, but really it's like, then you really know where God is leading you. And he'll show up there because his presence is peace,
like you said in the letter, he'll take that pain, right, and use it for his glory. How did he take your pain and use it for his glory?
So on March 31st, I entered another church, a church where this campus pastor is actually a felon. And so he knew what it was like, but he was walking in freedom and I wasn't. And so my drinking had gotten out of control. And so my husband contacted this pastor, and I just remember I was sick of being sick, and he knew what it was like to be behind bars. And I just remember him and his wife praying over me and praying like the generational curses and sins. And my family was full of them. I was the first Christian in my family. And so all this stuff like that I felt like physically I was like in this hunched over position. And as they prayed, like I almost felt myself like changing positions, like out of this like fetal position. And it
Mm.
was just like this weight was lifted as they prayed. And that was literally the last time I drank. I celebrated 3 years of sobriety on Easter Sunday this last year, March 31st.
Congratulations.
And so this church was awesome. They had a restoration conference where for 3 full days you sit in there and you hear of all these different speakers and guests, and they give you an opportunity to pray through some of the wounding that you've received in your past. And I just remember like there's this one segment where it was like lamenting, and they talked about the importance of grieving the things that have been done to you. And
Mm.
I just remember like I don't cry a lot. I don't know if it's because I was kind of hardened from prison, or my dad was always telling me to stop crying, or what it was, but this just emotional thing came over me where I was just like, and it was so great because the pastor assumed like the position of a pastor that had hurt you. He said, please, like, and it was just like it spoke so clearly, like, forgive me for my failure to you as a pastor. And it just went into all
Mm.
these areas. And like for me, it was so freeing because I was like hearing the words I'd never hear from the men that hurt me. And then we went through this lamenting process. And I just remember like feeling like someone was behind me just praying. And just again, like I was bawling, but it was just like this pressure just like erupted out of my heart. And that just started like the process of like doing every day. I also listened to the advice of this pastor and joined a Celebrate Recovery group.
Okay.
And for me, that was life-giving because it was rooted in scripture. My
Yeah.
leader was phenomenal. She had been sober for 35 years. And we're still like really close friends. And I mean, she's like 65,
Right.
and just knowing that she did it and hearing her, because I didn't really know anybody that had wrestled with alcohol and came out on the other side. All my family were, I had a lot of alcoholics in my family, but none of them were in recovery. And I didn't know what that looked like. And so for me,
Okay.
that was a safe place where we could share our junk. And they loved me. Like, I mean, they were
Yeah.
my fan club. Like when I published my book last year, like they all read it and were like, Brandy, you're so cool. Like they just,
Right. Right.
we celebrate each other. And I mean, it is
Yeah.
called Celebrate Recovery. So for me, that was really, really good. In that first, I mean, my last day before I moved was on my 3 years. Like we celebrated that together as a group.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome. I also attend. I'm actually one of the leaders that I celebrate. We had Celebrate Recovery at our church too.
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I love Celebrate Recovery. I love the fact that they focus on celebrating. You
Yep.
know, and that's what we should be doing. That's a powerful testimony that you have there. So in Celebrate Recovery, that's when you really found most of your freedom.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was just, that Bible verse that says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be
Yeah,
healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man, um, you know, does so much, produces so much fruit. Like it's
yeah,
the act of confessing, not even just sin, but like your stuff. Like the
yeah,
healing comes from getting in a healthy body of believers, whether it's a safe church or a Celebrate Recovery, or people like sponsors or whoever it is that is just
yeah,
you're sharing. Like the more, that's why I think why people write their stories and they
yeah,
write and they share their testimonies, like it gives life.
yeah,
It breathes healing. Like the scriptures talk about that, like sharing it, and it's healthy. Because if
yeah.
not, we isolate, and that's where Satan attacks us with the lies. Like
Right.
when we're in a healthy group of believers and I say something, like, oh man, I suck, or whatever it is, like somebody's like,
Yeah,
"Brittany, that's not true. Like this is what God says about you." Like we help each other. And so
yeah,
for
yeah,
me, like as difficult as that was, I just, instead of turning away in the pain, you just have to turn into the Lord and hear him and share, like with leading mops. Like I did
yeah,
not want to do that. But I mean, just the process of me getting up and sharing my testimony and then sharing what God had done, like
Hmm.
you wouldn't think it would change a bunch of like young moms, like they've never been in prison before. But the
Yeah.
things that God taught me in that hard pain, like helped them like receive the fruit of the same thing. Like whether it's that
Hmm.
they are struggling with whatever addiction it is,
Yeah.
social media or eating or over exercising. We all struggle with something. It's just, are we staying stuck in the junk, or are we allowing God to process our pain and to then give it out? I mean, and celebrate recovery. It's like, okay, so now like that's the next step. Like I have to give that out to other people.
Right. Right. And, okay, somebody watching this right now, listening to it, and they 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 hear your story and they can relate to you. What would you suggest to them?
Never stop pursuing God despite the church or relationships. Everybody's going to fail you, but God promises he's never going to fail you. He will never leave you or forsake you. And so, despite the circumstances, the hurts, everything, never stop pursuing him. And he gives you the power. The Holy Spirit will give you the power to try again. And even if you fall, though you fall 7,000 times, get back up,
Right.
because 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still moving in the right direction. And,
Right. Right.
just, and find those safe people that you can talk to. But that they're not God. God himself is going to, get in the word. I mean, I used to memorize Bible verses on my 3x5 cards. And when it got
Hmm.
bad up in the yard, like I just lapped I mean, it's Satan's playground in prison, right? But I had the
Yeah.
word, and that gave me life. And so I was just memorizing scriptures as I walked and prayed around the prison. And
Yeah.
those were my lifelines, like memorizing scripture, especially what you're struggling with. And so that way,
Right.
when you're struggling with, you can put that on instead of the lies or the fear that we often resort to.
Exactly. What about, before we wrap this thing up, the church hurt people? There's some people, they look at church, and again, church or the pastor where's they God? Now they got hurt. What suggestion offer you got for them to help them out?
To help the pastors out.
To know, to help people that get being
Oh,
hurt by the church, whether it's pastor, whether it's a congregation that just suffering from church hurt. What
yeah.
suggestion do you have for them?
Remember who your true enemy is. It's not people. It's not flesh and blood. It is the enemy. And he's out to steal, seek, and destroy you. And the fact that he pursues you through the church just speaks to the fact that God has a purpose and a plan so big that Satan is afraid of it. And not
Right.
to carry that on, because it's really just tanking yourself. Like we're called to confess and think about all the things that God has done for us. Like he has given us so much. He gave us his son to bleed, and by his stripes we are healed. We get to receive that. And so we just have to let it go, because they're never going to say the right thing. They're never going to do the right thing, and we have to let it go. And remember, like it's not them. Like it's our enemy, and he's trying to keep you stuck.